If you spend the best years of your life becoming exceptionally useful inside systems you do not own, do not be surprised when those systems reward you with admiration, salary, and exhaustion, but not freedom. That is the first thing I would tell you. The second thing is more painful. A great many intelligent people are not poor because they lack discipline, ambition, or talent. They remain financially ordinary because they keep deploying intelligence in the wrong direction. They use it to become more accurate instead of more leveraged. They use it to become more employable instead of more difficult to exclude from upside. They use it to optimize the machine rather than to acquire a claim on the machine. That is the real problem, not intelligence itself. It's allocation. I learned long ago that society does something very clever to smart children. It praises them early. It teaches them that the path to a good life is to become more precise, more correct, more credentialed, more reliable, and more fluent inside institutions that already exist. A smart child answers well, tests well, follows the syllabus well, memorizes fast, explains clearly, performs under evaluation. The institution looks at that child and says, good, this one understands how to win. But what the institution really means is something more useful to itself. This one understands how to perform inside our game. That is not the same as wealth. It is often the opposite of wealth if the person never updates the game. This is the mistake so many people make. They think the child who won the school game has already proven he is on the road to financial power. Sometimes he is, very often he is simply becoming easier for the adult system to place, rank, reward, and quietly contain. That is why I want to start with a very cold sentence. Schools mostly measure institutional intelligence. Wealth mostly rewards economic leverage. Those are not the same thing. And if you confuse them, you will spend 20 years becoming better and better at the wrong competition. I want you to picture two boys sitting in the same classroom. One learns how to give the expected answer. The other learns how to notice who set the question, what the grading system rewards, and where the real leverage sits outside the exam itself. The first boy gets praised more quickly. The second boy may look distracted, impatient, even undisciplined. 10 or 15 years later, the first boy may be deep inside a structured profession, respected, salaried, burdened, and expensive to replace, but easy to contain. The second may own a small piece of something ugly, boring, or socially unimpressive that keeps paying him while he sleeps. This is not a story about one being morally superior. It is a story about one being trained for performance and the other, whether consciously or not, starting to orient toward ownership. That difference compounds harder than IQ over time. When I read the source document, what stood out to me most was not the obvious claim that smart people often stay financially average. It was the structural mismatch underneath it. The document keeps returning to the same underlying point. Academic intelligence is rewarded inside fixed systems, while wealth creation rewards ambiguity, tolerance, persuasion, risk, leverage, and action under uncertainty. That is the real fault line. Faithful Esite Fay turn 39, file 0 Fay. I think that is exactly right. And I would push it one step further. The smart child is often trained to become correct. The wealthy adult is often trained or forced to become strategic. Correctness and strategy overlap. But they are not the same thing. Correctness asks what is the best answer. Strategy asks what position captures the most upside with survivable downside. Correctness asks what is true. Strategy asks what wins. Correctness asks, am I right? Strategy asks, what do I own if I am even roughly right early enough? That is the whole game. The average intelligent person is taught to value certainty before movement. That feels mature. It feels responsible. It feels like prudence. In markets and business, it is often disguised fear, because the world of wealth creation rarely gives you a clean exam. There is no answer key, no rubric, no professor telling you the task is now safe enough to begin. There is only price, timing, human behavior, asymmetry, and your willingness to move before the foolproof arrives. This is where smart people begin bleeding away years. They overanalyze, they compare, they model, they wait, they keep asking for more information, better timing, cleaner evidence, stronger confidence, fuller certainty. Meanwhile, someone less impressive on paper buys the rental house, opens the service business, takes the sales role with upside, starts the niche logistics firm, launches the ugly little product, builds the local customer list, fails once, fails twice, and is still in the game long before the smart observer has finished refining the theory. This is not because the less intellectual person understands reality more deeply. It is because he can tolerate being wrong in motion better than the intelligent observer can tolerate looking foolish in thought. That is a brutal asymmetry. The source text says this in a useful way when it argues that intelligence combined with overanalysis becomes paralysis, and that paralysis is financially expensive while average actors are already iterating in the market. Faithfulesite Fay turn 39 file 0 Fay, I agree with that. Completely. Paralysis is not neutral. It feels safe because nothing visibly bad happens while you are thinking, but the market charges for delay, the opportunity cost accumulates quietly. The compounding years disappear. The asset goes from cheap to fair to expensive while you are still refining your confidence. The network forms without you. The business matures without you. The operator learns through contact while you remain protected by abstraction. This is why intelligence can become a trap, not because thinking is bad, because thinking without conversion becomes a beautiful private theater that someone else gets rich while you perform in it. I want to give you the master metaphor, I think. Best explains the whole issue. Imagine two men standing beside a river. The first studies the water perfectly. He knows its chemistry, its speed, the angle of light, the probability of flooding, the strength of the current. The second builds a mill. 10 years later, the first man may understand the river better. The second owns something that the river has been turning for a decade, that is the difference between intelligence applied to comprehension and intelligence applied to capture. And wealth is usually built through capture. Not in the criminal sense, in the structural sense, capture the cash flow. Capture the margin, capture the appreciation, capture the equity, capture the distribution, capture the relationship between volatility and forced sellers. Capture the value of other people's time by building a system they work inside, capture the right to say yes when everyone else must wait. That is what the wealthy do. The average intelligent employee does something else. He increases the efficiency of someone else's mill. That can be lucrative for a while. It is not the same as ownership. This is why I think the employment trap matters so much. The source document is good on this point. It says smart people are highly employable, and that because they perform well inside structured organizations. They are rewarded with stability, promotions, and status, but not necessarily with scalable ownership. It also points out that average owners build systems they control while smart employees optimize systems they do not own. Faithfulesite Fay turn 39 file 0 Fay, that is one of the strongest lines in the source. And it is a line every intelligent, salaried person should sit with much longer than is comfortable. If you are brilliant inside a corporation, what exactly are you becoming? More useful, certainly more senior, perhaps. Better paid, possibly, but are you becoming harder to replace? Or simply more deeply embedded in a hierarchy that remains economically superior to you? That is the right question. A salary can grow, a title can rise, a bonus can improve. Yet if the fundamental structure remains the same, you are still selling labor into a system whose upside belongs mainly to shareholders, owners, founders, and those with real claims. You become a very elegant expense line. That is what many smart people cannot bear to say out loud. They have invested so much identity into being the best analyst, the best engineer, the best lawyer, the best doctor, the best researcher, the best architect within the system, that admitting the system still outranks them economically feels like a humiliation. So they do not admit it, they just get older, and the decades do the humiliating for them. Now, I am not saying employment is worthless. Far from it. Employment can be runway training, capital accumulation, network access, skill acquisition, market education, a protected environment in which to study how value really moves. The problem begins when employment stops being a stage and becomes an identity. Then the smart person becomes trapped inside a life that is externally respectable and internally capped. That is the part polite society will not say clearly enough. Respectable is not the same as rich. Prestigious is not the same as free. Well-paid is not the same as structurally powerful. $180,000 of salary inside a machine you do not own can still be less wealth building than a $70,000 lifestyle attached to assets that appreciate, small equity claims, recurring cash flow, and expanding control because the salary is a stream, the asset is a claim, and claims scale differently. This is why I keep coming back to one question. Are you being paid once, or are you building something that keeps paying? That is the dividing line between intelligent labor and intelligent wealth. The next trap smart people fall into is risk perception. And here again, the source is excellent. It explains that intelligent people are very good at seeing downside scenarios, hidden flaws, legal risks, market risks, and operational fragility, and that this can turn into a financial handicap because they can see too many failure paths to move decisively. Fay-Phyllosite Fay-Turn 39 File 0 Fay, that is exactly right. The stupid version of this argument is ignorance wins. That is not my point. My point is that wealth does not require blindness. It requires correctly priced risk. And many intelligent people do not price risk correctly because they measure it in intellectual terms rather than life. Architecture terms, they ask, can this fail? Of course it can. Everything can. The better question is, if it fails, what happens to me and what happens if it works? That is a much more useful form of intelligence because risk is never absolute. Risk is always attached to floor, buffer, skill, timing, and repeatability. If you come from money, a failed attempt can be embarrassing. If you come from very little, a failed attempt can be terminal. Those are different games. So I do not tell intelligent people to become more reckless. I tell them to become more strategic with their downside. Build a cash floor, lower fixed obligations, acquire portable skills, choose businesses or assets where the initial stake is small relative to upside, take staged bets, not theatrical bets, preserve the right to be wrong, and still remain in the game. That is how smart people should use their minds, not by eliminating uncertainty completely. That is impossible. By structuring life so that uncertainty becomes tolerable enough for action, this is where ordinary self-help content becomes insulting. It says, just take the leap number. That is the advice of people whose floor is soft enough that the leap is mostly psychological. Real adults build runways. Real adults do not worship courage in the abstract. They build conditions under which courage becomes rational. That is a far better definition of practical intelligence. The source document also talks about perfectionism, and here again I think it is right. It notes that smart people often want the product polished, the theory complete, the credentials secured, and the timing improved before they move, while the market rewards those who tolerate imperfection and iterate in public. Fay-Phyllosite Fay-Turn 39 File 0 Fay, that is one of the most expensive psychological habits in the modern professional class. Perfectionism feels noble. Often it is vanity mixed with fear. You do not want to look foolish. You do not want to release version 1. You do not want the store to open before the logo feels right. You do not want to make the pitch before the deck becomes flawless. You do not want to ask for equity before you can prove every line of your case. You do not want to be seen learning. That is the ego of the intelligent person. And the market punishes it because the market does not pay for your internal standard of elegance. It pays for contact, for timing, for distribution, for a product that exists, for a service someone can buy, for a machine that starts turning. The average operator with a mediocre first version can iterate toward excellence because he is in the market. The perfectionist outside the market is still immaculate and unproven. That is not superiority. It is delayed humiliation. Now let me say something about social intelligence, because the source is again correct here, and many high IQ people still resist the lesson. It argues that wealth creation often depends less on raw IQ than on persuasion, negotiation, storytelling, confidence, projection, and relationship building. It also says capital flows through relationships, not test scores. Fay-Phyllosite Fay-Turn 39 File 0 Fay, I think that is absolutely right. And it is one of the hardest truths for the intellectually proud to swallow, because pure analytical talent feels cleaner than persuasion, more honorable, more rigorous, more real. But money moves through people long before it moves through spreadsheets. Deals happen because someone trusts you. Customers buy because someone feels seen, influenced, or reassured by you. Investors back because someone believes your energy and your story, not because your mind is pure. A mediocre operator with real social leverage can build astonishing economic power. A brilliant isolated thinker can die admired and asset. Light, that is how the world works. This is not a plea to become fake. It is a plea to understand that transactions are human before they are mathematical, and humans are moved by stories, presence, confidence, and repeated trust, far more than smart people would like to admit. That is why sales is such an underappreciated wealth skill. That is why operators who can recruit, negotiate, calm, excite, and persuade often outrun analysts who can see 10 layers deeper into the mechanics, but never get anyone to move with them. Wealth creation is not a clean intelligence contest. It is a messy coalition, building exercise inside markets. That is why social leverage matters. The next point the source makes, and again I think it is one of its sharpest, is about prestige. It notes that many intelligent people are drawn toward high-status careers like academia, medicine, law, engineering, research, and other intellectually demanding fields that offer respect, but not necessarily scalable upside relative to the effort invested. Meanwhile, average wealth builders may choose trades, logistics, franchising, sales, or real estate, which carry less status but often far more asset-building potential. Fe fila cite Fe turn 39 file 0 Fe, that is not a condemnation of the professions. It is a question about incentives. Prestige and profitability are not the same axis. Society loves to confuse them because prestige stabilizes hierarchy. If the brightest people chase status ladders inside institutions, while others quietly buy cash, flowing businesses, boring routes, land, rental units, storage facilities, distribution rights, or small services with pricing power, the results diverge dramatically over 20 years. One person becomes admired, the other becomes difficult to control. That is a very different outcome. This is why I think smart people must ask themselves a painful question. Am I optimizing for admiration or for multiplication, because those can diverge very fast? A senior academic may possess far more raw intelligence than a regional plumbing business owner. The owner may still become much richer because he owns a machine that throws off cash, raises prices, hires labor, and can later be sold. The academic may own almost nothing beyond expertise and reputation. One is noble. One is wealthy. Those are not always the same life. The document also makes a subtle point about conformity conditioning. It argues that smart students become comfortable inside systems because systems reward them consistently, while many average wealth builders feel less attached to institutional approval and therefore less afraid to step outside. Fe felicite Fe turn 39 file 0 Fe, that may be one of the deepest traps of all. The smart child is rewarded by institutions so often that he begins to trust institutional progression as the default path to security study, perform, be recognized, advance. It worked in school, it worked in college, it worked in early career, so he assumes it will continue working. The problem is that markets are not classrooms and ownership is not a grading rubric. The market does not care how many gold stars you receive for being correct inside somebody else. At syllabus, it cares what you own, what you can sell, what you can scale, what relationships you can activate, what systems you can build, and how much asymmetry sits inside your position. That is not unfair in the emotional sense. It is simply a different game. The smart institutionalist often stays because the room still feels legible. The less institutionally attached operator leaves sooner because he feels no deep romance toward the system's approval. That emotional difference matters more than people think. The document also addresses delayed adulthood through extended education, debt, and long credentialing tracks. It points out that by the time some highly educated people reach stable earning power, peers with less intellectual status may already have years of business experience, market exposure, property ownership, or asset accumulation behind them. Fe felicite Fe turn 39 file 0 Fe, again, I think this is one of the sharpest parts of the source. Time and ownership matters more than people like to admit. A gifted mind that spends 10 extra years refining itself inside low ownership structures may emerge more knowledgeable and still be economically behind someone who entered the market earlier, learned by doing, accumulated claims, bought assets, built networks, and let compounding begin sooner. That is not a moral statement. It is arithmetic. Markets reward time plus ownership. Credentials by themselves do not compound. They only compound if converted into claims. That word again, converted, almost everything comes back to that. Can your intelligence convert? Can your skill convert? Can your credibility convert? Can your degree convert? Can your network convert? Can your labor convert? That is the real question, and too many intelligent people never ask it because they assume value will naturally be recognized. Sometimes it is. Often it is not. Recognition is not the same as capture. Now, I do not want to leave you in criticism. Criticism without a path is just stylish despair. So let me tell you what I think a truly intelligent person should do once he sees the trap. First, stop worshiping correctness if correctness is not building claims. There is no trophy in being the smartest analyst in a room whose upside belongs elsewhere. Second, build at least one stream of ownership outside wages, not later. Now, small is fine, embarrassingly small is fine. What matters is category shift, a product, a service business, a revenue share, an equity stake, a rental angle, a digital asset, a niche audience, a small acquisition, anything that begins moving you out of pure salary dependence. Third, Build a floor strong enough that your intelligence can take staged risk without demanding total certainty. Cash reserve, lower fixed obligations, portable skills. Low vanity spending, real runway. That is how you turn fear from a permanent veto into a variable. Fourth, train social leverage as seriously as you trained analytical leverage. Learn to sell, learn to negotiate, learn to pitch, learn to recruit, learn to make people feel safe moving with you, learn to speak in the language of value rather than only the language of truth. The market pays those who can move humans, not just impress them. Fifth, stop confusing prestige with power. A title is not a claim. A degree is not a machine. Respect is not equity. If the thing you are building cannot eventually detach itself from your direct labor, then you are still inside a cage with better wallpaper. Sixth, become a generalist enough to integrate value across systems. The source document makes this point too when it says breadth often creates more commercial opportunity than narrow technical mastery. It argues that someone who understands technology, finance, marketing, and psychology moderately well can build more wealth than someone who understands one domain perfectly but cannot convert it. Fay file site Fay turn 39 file 0 Fay that is right. Depth earns admiration. Breadth plus judgment often earns money. The market loves integrators. They can assemble teams, translate between specialists, spot value where disciplines overlap. That is why so many brilliant narrow experts remain dependent while broad. Commercially literate operators accumulate power. The market pays for translation more than smart people think. Now let me say one final thing about comfort. The real enemy of intelligent people is not ignorance. It is comfort disguised as prudence. Comfort in being admired, comfort in being right. Comfort in being respected by institutions. Comfort in looking serious. Comfort in not risking reputational embarrassment. Comfort in being able to explain why they have not yet moved. That is the danger. Because comfort keeps the mind brilliant and the balance sheet ordinary. The source ends with the right question. Are you using your intelligence to become indispensable to a system or to build something you own? That is the exact line intelligent people need to sit with. Fay Felicite Fay turn 39 file 0 Fay. I would say it this way. Are you using your brain to become a more valuable servant or a more powerful owner? That is the choice. And the older you get, the more expensive it becomes not to answer. The final image I want to leave you with is simple. Imagine two architects. One spends 20 years making another man's palace more efficient, beautiful, and durable. The other spends the same years slowly acquiring one ugly little building, then another, then a small service business attached to the block, then the contracts, then the cash flow, then the leverage to buy more. The first architect may be more brilliant. The second may die richer. That is not because the world hates intelligence. It is because intelligence without claim still leaves the palace in somebody else's name. That is the whole lesson. The contract I would make with my future self is simple. I will stop using intelligence only to make other systems work better. I will stop waiting for perfect certainty before building ownership. I will train persuasion as seriously as analysis. I will value claims over credentials once the credential has done its job. I will stage risk instead of worshiping safety that leaves me dependent. I will seek multiplication, not just admiration. And I will remember that smart people do not stay poor because intelligence is weak. They stay poor because they were rewarded for using it in ways that made institutions stronger before they ever learned how to make themselves harder to exclude from the upside. That is the line. That is the threshold. And once you see it clearly, you cannot go back to calling a life of elegant dependent success without hearing. Somewhere beneath the praise, the sound of your own unrealized ownership,